We'll go on to our next research presentation, which is New Neighbours, New Opportunities, How Diversity is Good for Development. And Konrad Pedziwatr from Krakow University of Economics is going to present that. If there's time at the end, we'll see if there's questions, but we're already right on schedule, so we may not have time. Konrad, take it away.
Thank you very much. Very important part of the premium research was looking into how Polish migrants are contributing to various regions, in particular Denmark, Netherlands, Spain. And we also, there was a question earlier about the return migrants. We were also researching within the project certain regions in Poland and looking into some of the sort of key findings from this research and how Poles who returned back home, how they are actually accommodating, adapting to new realities. And the same type of research was carried out among Turkish migrants, and I hope some of our colleagues will also talk about it. But a small component of our project was to look into also Ukrainian economic and forced migrants in Europe. And in particular, one of the key questions that we were addressing was how can vulnerable regions in Europe, and in particular this was the case of Poland, turn a demographic shock caused by the beginning of the full-scale invasion into opportunity for resilience. And in our case, obviously the most important was the case of Poland, but we kind of looked more globally also into Ukrainian displacement. As you know, there are over 4.4 million forced migrants from Ukraine who have temporary protection within the EU, and also a very substantial number of Ukrainians are displaced within Ukraine. And Poland is one of the very important countries where a significant number, almost 1 million forced migrants from Ukraine decided to settle, at least temporarily. And they are covered by the temporary protection regulations. And what is important is also that they added to 1.5 million Ukrainians who came to Poland before the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And this is an important sort of division within the project and research that we make between the so-called economic migrants, so those who came to Poland before the full-scale invasion, and forced migrants, those who came after the full-scale invasion. Taking into account that this is a very sort of flexible sort of definition, that some of the people who came to Poland before the full-scale invasion were also forced migrants, because the war did not start in 2022, but as you know, it started 2014. And this 2014 is also a very important sort of moment, because it was the moment when Poland started to transform from mostly emigration country to increasingly immigration country. So migration transition started to take place. And Poland is a very important sort of case as well, because not only because of this huge outflow of Poles post-accession, post-2004 when Poland joined the EU, but also it is also a very interesting case of sort of depopulation and one of the fastest sort of aging societies. And this has to do because of the outflow of migrants and also very low total fertility rates. So this has to be sort of taken into account. And what we did in our project, we did two things. We looked into Ukrainian presence in Poland from both quantitative and qualitative perspective. As far as the first one is concerned, we were carried out a survey with almost 1,100 respondents who were living in large cities, and these large cities we defined as those over 100,000 residents plus, and outside of these large cities, which also involved rural areas. And we tried to sort of weight our sample in such a way that we would have both economic migrants and forced migrants in these different localities. And apart from that, we carried out qualitative research in two regions, vulnerable regions in Poland, one in Opolskie region, in Oleski County, and a second one in Podlaski region in Zambrowski County. And as part of this qualitative research, which involved sort of participant observation, ethnography, we carried out 33 interviews. And I'll just share a few findings from these two types of research we carried out. So as far as the quantitative findings are concerned, we looked at various areas of Ukrainian integration, and one of the important elements of the human capital as well that Ukrainians bring with their presence to Poland is also this element of it's linked with their health. So we asked about the self-assessment of the general sort of condition, health condition, and also mental health and also access to healthcare system. And as far as the first one is concerned, we showed that we could see that residents of large cities are much more likely to report good or very good health. And we could see a very significant difference between the forced migrants and economic migrants, where 13% of the forced migrants were reporting very bad sort of health condition, and only half of the 7% of the economic migrants. So we could clearly see sort of better general health. And this was particularly visible when mental health question was, when we asked about the mental health. Obviously, with the ongoing war, this has a huge impact both on economic and forced migrants. And obviously, and here we could see that the large cities where those were much better sort of healthcare was reported. And also, this partially has to do with better access to mental health care specialists. And particularly low mental health care sort of percentage was visible among forced migrants. And interestingly, we could see that better access to healthcare was in large cities, but our qualitative research showed that most of the time people were, and also when we asked in detail this question, we could see that actually access to basic healthcare was better in outside of the big cities rather than big cities, which is one of the important findings. As far as the economic situation of Ukrainians is concerned, they are in general quite well integrated, and it concerns not only economic migrants but also refugees. If you look into various types of research, they will show you that almost 3/4 of the forced migrants are actually employed. They are in the labor market. And our research showed that the full-time employment is more frequent in large cities, and here the job qualification match was higher. So the skill matching was lower outside of the large cities, which obviously had to do with the specifications of the labor market outside of the large cities. And you can clearly see by sectors of employment that IT, technology, finance is much more prevalent in larger cities, and it's not there. And low-skilled jobs are mostly to be found outside of the large cities. But interestingly, if you look into healthcare, we can see that actually it is much more visible outside of the large cities, and we are thinking that it may have to do with the bigger shortages of actually medical staff outside of the large cities, and that's the reason why migrants find their jobs there. As far as the social benefits are concerned, we see they are more likely to be used outside of the large cities. In terms of, we looked into also transnational links, and one of the ways of looking into transnational links is obviously from the financial perspective is looking into remittances. And interestingly, we found out that not that many Ukrainians in Poland, both forced migrants and economic migrants living in and outside of the large cities are relying on remittances coming from Ukraine. But we could see that quite a lot of Ukrainians are actually sending remittances home, and slightly more from large cities than from outside of large cities. And obviously, a very important element of the integration we looked into was the element of cultural integration. And here we looked into self-assessment of the Polish language proficiency, which was higher in large cities, but we could see that the intentions to study Polish was more visible outside of the large cities. And this is one of the actually deficiencies of the smaller towns and rural areas, that the language courses are not so much visible. And this cultural and economic integration is translating also into intentions to stay. And we could see that while the intentions to stay permanently in Poland was very visible among the economic migrants. 50% of them wanted to stay in Poland. Only 23% of the forced migrants were thinking about it. And important findings also of the study was coming from this qualitative research, where we looked specifically into these two regions, one in northeast of Poland and the second one in southwest of Poland. And one of the very important findings of this research was that the smaller towns offer a very important sort of human scale sort of advantage of sort of closer interpersonal contacts, direct access to especially local administration. And we could also see that networks were very important, crucial sort of factor stimulating migration to these specific places. This is one of the quotes from our interviews, which is pointing out to these very important elements of networks that in a way contributed to the fact that these persons decided to stay in these particular areas. And we could see also in other research projects that this played a role. But sometimes people just found themselves were in the smaller towns because this was the only place where accommodation was available. And then they had to find their way through. So in general, we could see that in this outside of the large cities, what is very important is this informal model of adaptation, in which we could see the key sort of features of this model were that the communes were a very important sort of primary actor in this integration process. But we could see very importantly that individual strategies and informal practices were crucial in adapting to the new sort of environment. In the lack of institutional channels of integration, in a way, migrants were taking things into their own hands, as we say, and there was a very strong reliance on other types of strategies. And these are some of the findings from the Olesno region, where and the change, how it changed from sort of a place of net emigration to immigration. One of the key problems reported in these regions were obviously limitations of the local labor market, and this we could see with our quantitative data that the skill matching was much lower in outside of the large cities. At the same time, we try to look also in the project, I'm soon ending, is also the contribution of Ukrainians to origin regions. And in a time of war, obviously, these transnational links were very limited. They had limited options to go back, but the remittances was one of the evidence of ongoing transnational flows. And we could see, apart from this economic material sort of flows, we could see a very important emotional and symbolic sort of dimensions of transnationalism and keeping in touch with families and kins who stayed in Ukraine. To conclude, we could see, especially on the basis of our quantitative analysis, that Ukrainians are very well integrating into various sort of sectors of economy, but also in cultural sense and in a social sense. And when it comes to small towns, we found out that they are really extremely important spaces for integration. They provide less anonymous environment, closer contacts with local residents, and a better access for education for children and basic healthcare. But at the same time, there are certain drawbacks, such as, for example, transportation. It was mentioned in other panel that how Ukrainians are reviving Danish rural areas, and it was mentioned by Hanne how some important services can be brought to the communities, and precisely this is what we found out also in Poland, that some of the important services sort of were missing, like when it comes to, for example, access to specialized healthcare or language courses and other types of services, but if they are brought, then this integration process, this environment of integration in smaller, outside of the large cities, is much more friendlier and extremely efficient. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.